Thank you for joining us here on PM Express. I'm pretty sure you've watched our special investigative documentary on the PBC, the produce buying company. And we're going to get into that tonight. The reason why we chose to focus on this, because in a country, for a country that is in crisis, one of the biggest earners has to perform. If cocoa fails to perform, we are going to have even more serious challenge on our hands, more damning, more serious than we're currently experiencing. That's why this is a very important subject to look at. And it fits into a bigger picture, really. In the last few years, we've actually seen that we've seen a certain decline in cocoa and its contribution to our economy. And that's one of the things that we are looking at to, in essence, try and get to the bottom of the challenge. And this PBC example is just the latest in a long history, recent history, of things that appears not to go right when it comes to managing the cocoa sector and its contribution to the country. And you see on your screens there where we are when it comes to PBC. And PBC, by the way, it is that vehicle that the state uses to buy the cocoa that our farmers produce and sell. It is not entirely state-owned, but it's significantly state-owned enterprise that, in essence, buys the cocoa and sells it. Now, as we speak, if you look at the market share challenge that we've just put on a screen for you, that market share had dwindled from 30.9% all the way to somewhere 8% to a story already. And that the private sector, more than 92% of the cocoa that we produce is being bought and sold by private companies. Many of them, they are not even Ghanaian-owned companies. Because the PBC used to be the only wholly owned Ghanaian entity backed by the state to do business with our own cocoa farmers. And as we see, it's been run down, to put it mildly, over the last few years. And so that share is now down to 8%. But here's a catch. Because of the challenge, the taxpayers' money has been pumped a lot into this because as you know, the Cocoa Board has now been forced to fund the PBC's own purchases, but they've been incurring significant losses. They owe the bank more than 500 million cedis, and that is also leaving a hole. And it all ties up. It all makes sense, right? All this debt conversation that we're having, every little drop that you see leak from PBC may contribute to that problem as well. And that's a decline that we've seen over the period. And we've seen this disagreement between the past administration and the current administration about who is to blame and who did what and who didn't. The real question to ask is, why is the PBC in its current state? For a player that represents our interest, for a sector that contributes so significantly to the economy, that is pretty alarming. And they've been engaged in this war of words. We'll get into the real reasons why the PBC is where we are from the perspective of the previous administration, but also the current administration, which you've heard. And then this table tells a story in terms of the total revenue. So the losses here are staggering. Staggering losses over the period is what they've recorded. I mean, my colleague, Kwete, who did this work, indicates that if the finance ministry tracked the losses from 2016 to 2020, they arrived at a significant loss in revenue amounting to 2.9 billion cedis. So that's quite a lot of money that has gone down, that PBC is losing, that they could make. 50%, he says, 50% of what they're making is a loss. They've lost 50% of their revenue. And no wonder they've lost the market share, because without money, you can't buy and purchase the cocoa. And so the private sector is taking over that particular space there. Now, if you look at the shareholding, the top 5 largest shareholders when it comes to the PBC, you look at the SNIT, state-owned SNIT. You look at the Ministry of Finance with 36% following. Then you look at the Tiger Mutual Fund. You look at the NTHC. You look at the STD norms. And so if you look at the state interest there, that is the overwhelming majority stakeholder in this particular ownership. And so the taxpayers' resources, your interest and my interest is here. and it's been mismanaged to where we currently see. So that's a conversation we'll be having today with the individuals involved, and we'll talk to the Cocoa Board as well, and how they are also trying to manage this particular problem. Stay with me after the break, we'll get into the details.